And from the picture of his kitchen, he wasn't hurting for food, was he? So he piles those things together because he's constantly thinking. July 25th, he shows up at the Kroc Center, fills out the paperwork, and on July 27th, he comes back and says he got a job at Save-A-Lot. So he doesn't waste any time. And he sets up that telephone. Now on August 15th, Elizabeth Griffith makes her last call to the crisis helpline, which she called frequently, according to Tina Schwartz. Tina Schwartz also told us that Elizabeth was a paranoid schizophrenic and that she was very regimented in her routine. She had her routine and didn't get outside of that routine. And isn't that interesting when we begin to listen to what the defendant describes as happening to her? That suddenly she wants to come over to the house. That the paranoid schizophrenic who's regimented wants to explore the upper portion of a vacant house. It's not an adventurous girl. On the 16th, as part of that routine, as she rides the Ashland Transit Authority, as Rebecca Taylor says that she does frequently, she gets dropped off at Dorlo Pizza from Aldi's around 10 a.m. And Rebecca Taylor told us she's a nice lady. She's ridden before, talked to her. But again, she's talkative within the context of that routine. We're comfortable on that bus. Makes a call to Cindy Swanger, her friend. Last time Swanger hears from her. Last time anyone outside of the defendant, as far as we can tell, spoke to her alive. And Cindy Swanger's a true friend, isn't she? Helped look for Elizabeth. Cried for Elizabeth. Was concerned about Elizabeth. But what else did she tell us when we apply it to that routine and getting her out of her comfort zone? Cindy Swanger said Elizabeth had someone she wanted her to meet. She'd met somebody. And she never met that person. But isn't that interesting? Is it a coincidence? That yet that very night, she would depart from that routine around 10 p.m. and decide to take a walk in the dark, at least as far as the Y, to go to a place she'd never been, with a guy she had just talked to maybe a couple times. Of course, Cindy Swanger also said she could misinterpret things too. Somebody talking to her, being nice to her, coming in, playing Yahtzee. Did she misinterpret that? Cindy Swanger says yes. Now between 12:30 and 1, Rebecca Taylor then sees Elizabeth Griffith walking back along East Main Street. And that's the last time anybody credible sees her alive. According to Grate, he received a call from Griffith, met her at the YMCA and walked her back over. Was downstairs playing a game. According to him, she wanted to see upstairs. Also, according to him, he's doing what? He's thinking about seeing if she wants to die. He's trading his life for hers. He's thinking this poor woman, she's set up for a lifetime of misery. So while she's playing a game downstairs, he's plotting. Captain Lay, when he searches the apartment, finds her ID, cards, pretty much everything but the cell phone. That tells you she wanted to come back. She never made it. Captain Lay also tells us the last outgoing call from Elizabeth Griffith's phone went to Shawn's phone number. That's why the defendant got rid of it. Ditched that phone. Because he's guilty and didn't want it traced back to him. Always thinking, isn't it? Always thinking. Even the playing card, score sheet, Shawn. Didn't want that found, did he? Trace it back to him. Always thinking. August 17th, documents in the Daily Reader that he killed Elizabeth Griffith. Now, there's no doubt this defendant killed Elizabeth Griffith and Stacey Hicks. But he writes down the date. And it's also interesting when we discuss this defendant's thought process that she comes over on the 16th. But he's well aware of what midnight does to a date, doesn't he? Because he kills her after midnight. And isn't that interesting? A lot of us, when we're asked in that overnight hour, right, we don't think, well, it was like 1 a.m., so the date would have changed. And, you know, when you have that come up in your life, you start thinking, well, it was Wednesday, and then, well, I guess 2 a.m. it'd be Thursday, but we don't really think of it that way, right? It's all nighttime. It would all be a Wednesday night, a Friday night, a Monday night. Not this defendant. He knows exactly when he killed her. Because he's always thinking. September 7th, Elizabeth Griffith gets reported as missing to the police department. And as we get into this defendant's thought process, isn't that interesting that it's not until September 7th that she's reported missing? How vulnerable is Elizabeth Griffith? That nobody called the police department for weeks after she went missing. You think this defendant didn't notice that? As he sits and watches, talks to people? He noticed. If he killed Elizabeth Griffith and put her out of her misery, as he likes to put it, who would notice? Didn't notice for weeks. Now on September 8th, 6:30 to 7, Stacey Hicks is at Walmart picking up her gardening supplies. Puts it in her Mitsubishi, and then goes to get her nails done. She's not in Ashland to party. She's not looking to pick anybody up. She came into town, get her nails done, pick up some supplies, go back, take care of her dogs, and do a little landscaping around her trailer. But she gets a flat tire. Her son Corey told us that it's a problem tire. And it leaked out all the air, and she ends up at the BP. So after a lot of calling, Corey finds Wayne Bright to come help Mom. The defendant interprets this as Corey Stanley pimping her out. What a curious phrase, huh? Pimping her out. When some guy is just supposed to come help her change the tire. Not because she wants to play some sort of damsel in distress. She doesn't have a jack. She doesn't have a tire iron. You need the tools in order to change the tire. So Wayne Bright shows up. And we know from the picture the detective took of his phone that Hicks called him at 10:19 so that they'd have the contact information. All the evidence points that that conversation occurred. Now, a curious thing about Wayne Bright. Wayne Bright misidentified the defendant in court, right? Mr. Bright said Mr. McNamara here was Mr. Grate, which we all know is not the case. And we all know from the evidence, even the defendant admits he was there. So it's kind of a funny aside, isn't it? But what's it tell you about Mr. Bright? Helpful farm boy, shows up. But the conversation with Wayne Bright, this helpful farm guy, simple man, the defendant interprets him as a sugar daddy. That's the conversation that she has with the man who came to change her tire, that she was being pimped out by Corey, and then he says, well, I called her out later on it. That's Wayne Bright she's talking about. So think about that. Nathan Keck sees him inside the BP. They leave the station together. In fact, they were getting coffee, and he overhears the conversation. And Corey testifies to this. She's on the phone saying, tire's fixed, getting coffee, heading home. Getting coffee, heading home. Not getting coffee, gonna go hang out with this guy I just met. Going home. That's what the reliable testimony tells you. And what happens from there, we have to rely on Shawn Grate. It says they arrive at the house in the vehicle. That makes sense? But he also tells you that when they first got there, they were getting along then. They were getting along. And we'll hear some of that. But is that what it looked like in the exhibit we played in the video? Getting along? And sometime September 9th, either 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., depending on how the Eastern Standard Time thing got factored in by Joel Eisenhower, he takes two videos. The first, he's kidnapping Stacey Hicks for the purpose to rape her, kill her, and rob her. And the second, he actually films himself raping her. Now, remember, he says he only kept her for an hour. This is significantly longer than an hour. It's double, at least, maybe triple, depending on the math. And what does she say on that video? You said you'd let me go. You made me have sex with you. Now, isn't that interesting? He knows that. She looks right at that video and says, you made me have sex with you. Did Stacey Hicks know she was going to die? Was Stacey Hicks in that moment captured on that video talking to us so that we would know what happened? That maybe someday someone would find that video and be able to piece it together. I have to let my dogs out. Corey told you that. That's what concerned them, was if she's not there, we better get over there and let the dogs out, right? And even in her last moments, that's where her thoughts are. The defendant says, we're sitting on the bed. She started acting up when I videoed, trying to act all innocent. Remember her eye? Her eye is dark red. She's been assaulted before that video even came on. Which makes sense. And she says, you made me have sex with you. And September 9th, the Daily Reader, Exhibit 301. September 9th, 2016. Picked her up on the 8th and is well aware that it was after midnight when he killed her. Because he thinks about it. He's thoughtful. before, and even after. Now, Corey Stanley reports to police his mother's missing. They come to Ashland. Joanna Smith reports seeing a man get out of a vehicle on 9th Street. She identifies as Shawn Grate. The car is later towed away the evening of the 11th. This demonstrates the defendant's control of Stacey's motor vehicle. But again, he's not parking it nearby. He's not parked in the parking lot that's behind the house on Covert Court. He's not parked where it's necessarily convenient to him. Where he parks it is indicative of guilt. It's indicative of his thought process. He parks it a couple blocks away on a residential street, not in a random parking lot, so that it's not next to him, so that if it's found, it can't be traced back to him. On September 13th, 6:48 a.m., Lori Spillick makes that 911 call. An Ashland Police Department arrives and arrests him at Covert Court. Bodies of Elizabeth, Stacey are found inside the house. This house that he broke into and set up downstairs. Now, he's got blankets over all of the entrances inside, even going out to the front so that it's blocked off from the upstairs. And think about that as we discuss Elizabeth. He's got blocked so you don't go that way. But we know he was up there, one, because Elizabeth was there, but remember the footprint in the dust that Ed Staley took. He's been up and down there. The point is this: everything the defendant does is premeditated. He's thoughtful, he's cunning, he's ready to receive an opportunity when he finds it. And that's important as you consider these counts. Elizabeth Griffith, 3 counts as to her, 2 counts of aggravated murder and kidnapping. 1 murder, 2 counts, because there's different ways to violate the statute. Each one is a separate and distinct matter that you'll have the opportunity to deliberate on. We know from the testimony that Elizabeth Griffith is the sort of person who drops off flowers and cards for the maintenance guys. So, that's the sort of person she was. Contrast that with what we know of the defendant. Now, the specifications, the judge is going to tell you that you won't consider the specifications to any count unless you find the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt as to that count. So, aggravated murder, he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt as to aggravated murder, you will then proceed to do the specifications and find whether or not he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt as to each specification. If he's not guilty of the aggravated murder, you won't consider the specifications.
I'm afraid that we're going to find some evidence related to Elizabeth. And if that's the case, and you haven't talked to me about it and been straight up with me, it's not going to look good. So I want to give you the opportunity, before we dig into that, to be honest with me about Elizabeth. So what do you know about her disappearing?
He's thinking again.
Help me out here, Shawn. Help yourself.
She's crazy.
Where's she at?
We already know where she is. No, she is.
No. Where's she at? Shawn. You know where she's at? Where's she at?
She's set free. No more problems. She'll have to cry tomorrow.
What an odd saying. She's set free. It's because he's thought about it. He's thought about it. If he just killed her in the spur of the moment, wouldn't have set her free, would he? And the other interesting thing is, from a time perspective, that's about a 3.5-minute clip. And it's kind of uncomfortably long as we sit here listening to it, right? But what did Dr. Barr say? It takes 3 to 5 minutes to kill somebody using the method that the defendant used. So the entire time that clip's playing, maybe even longer, he'd be gripped onto her neck, the life coming out of her. Think about that. It's an excruciating period of time when you have to sit here for that period of time. So what is aggravated murder? Aggravated murder in count 1, you're going to be instructed in the period August 16th to September 13th. We know this occurred 16th into the 17th morning hours. Defendant purposely and with prior calculation and design caused the death of Elizabeth Griffith. There are, in essence, 3 elements: purposely, prior calculation and design, and caused the death of another. We'll discuss the first 2 elements because there's really no question, is there, that he caused the death of Elizabeth Griffith. Purpose. You have to have a specific intention to cause a certain result. So in this case, he has to have the specific intention to kill Elizabeth Griffith. And the point of purposely is to parse out accidental killings, accidental crimes. We want intentional conduct. You don't want to penalize somebody criminally for something that's an accident. Well, we know this is not an accident. And the key phrase is this bottom one. The purpose with which a person does an act is known only to himself, unless he expresses it to others or indicates it by his conduct. Now, he does a lot of talking, doesn't he? And a lot of thinking. But it's also his purpose indicated by his conduct. So look at the conduct. What inferences can be made from it? From the means used. 3 to 5 minutes of cervical compression. How she's arranged in that closet. What's the defendant's purpose? Well, you can look at his conduct and arrive at that conclusion. Or you can listen to what he says. They get you the same place, ladies and gentlemen. And the judge will tell you the purpose with which a person does an act, brings about a result, is determined from the manner it's done, the means used, and all the other facts and circumstances and evidence. all of the evidence. So you can't put the blinders on. You can't slide something under the microscope and really kick it around. You have to take a broader view here. Take a broad view of the evidence. What do you know of this defendant? What do you know of this victim? Apply some common sense to it. Listen to what he says and look at what he did to arrive at the conclusion that the defendant is guilty of count 1. So what's prior calculation and design? A definite process of reasoning in advance of the homicide. Now, the process must include a mental plan involving studied consideration, the method of death, and the means with which to cause the death. Okay. To include. It doesn't have to be the plan. The plan just has to include contemplation by the defendant that he's going to commit the homicide. And that's important as we get down the road. But a definite process of reasoning. And there's a reason. We're not limited in time and duration to that process of reasoning. The other part of this instruction includes that the circumstances surrounding the homicide must show a scheme designed to carry out the calculated decision to cause the death. In this case, the defendant has to have a scheme that is calculated to set Elizabeth free. A process of reasoning by which he's going to accomplish that goal. And the last part of the prior calculation and design instruction will tell you no particular amount of consideration must be given. It just has to differentiate from acting on the spur of the moment. This is not a spur of the moment killing. He's thought about this to set her free. It's not something you just do. It's not something you just get mad about. He just needs a plan. And causation, as to the aggravated murder, cause is an act which directly produces the death of another without which it wouldn't have occurred. And in this case, it's 3 to 5 minutes of cutting off the oxygen to Elizabeth Griffith's brain. So, the defendant acting with prior calculation and design?
What time was she? What one did you know to do this? Yes. Whether you were thinking about doing it or that you did it. How do you understand? Was it while she's there, or was it sometime after you met her, or was it?
Just went upstairs, and I knew
Before he went upstairs, he was going to see if she really wanted to die. What he's saying is before she went upstairs, he was going to kill her. Because there's only 2 options there, right? Either she does want to die, and presumably he's going to finish her off then, do her the favor, or she won't. She won't want to die. He's going to kill her anyhow. There's a definite process of reasoning there. He's contemplating homicide. Had she gone along with it, he would have choked her initially and she'd be dead. And there'd be no question there was premeditation. Now, he's not totally sure how she's going to react. But again, he likes the flexibility, doesn't he? And what a statement. I'm going to go upstairs and see if she wants to die. That's a lot of consideration. It's a lot of thought about this. That her heart is hurt. She's been let down. She talks about killing herself. Poor girl, all she wants to do is be with God. You don't just decide that in an instant. That isn't a momentary thing. You think about that. He thinks about that. He sits around thinking about that. His heart's pounding as he heads up the stairs. Why is it pounding? Because he's walking up the stairs to kill her. It's building to a homicide.
With passion, wanted to just free her from this world. I just wanted, I did first talking to her. This lady.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, she's been with us for many, many years. But it's just sad. It's going to be horrible going through my mind. And
So you're thinking downstairs, she's wanting to come upstairs. Depending on how this goes, you may or may not do it. I think is what you told me before. And then run up the stairs. You get up the stairs and you know this is going to go one way or the other. You depend on what she does, or depend on how this goes. So then you put your hands on her neck. But is it about how she does, or are you at that point saying, don't do this, telling yourself, Shawn, don't do this, like it's common, like Tony?
yeah, it's common. Feel it like it's common and my heart's pumping. Just hope she don't say nothing else about nothing that's going to make you feel sorry for her. So I don't know what she says, you know what I mean? Just go along, showing her upstairs. And it's a lot of work. She sits down in a rocking chair. She's nice. Yeah, I sit down in bed. Showed her some stuffed animals. She's into stuffed animals. I asked her if she had stuffed animals. And I don't know exactly. A good long pause. There's a good pause for a while. Open the windows. He was upstairs for probably like 15 minutes.
Okay. When your heart's pumping, you feel like you're going to do this for your mom. Is it a feeling that you can't put into words that you swear this is going to happen here? Or is it, how is that? When you say your heart's pumping and you're thinking, oh, here's where the momentum's going. Here we go.
All things flashing before me. Flashing.
Like what?
Like it just wouldn't happen to me. And I thought that before I even did it, I thought I'm not going to leave. But there's no way to really get around to it. And you can already know I live here.
Before I did it, I was thinking, too many people already know I live here. Prior calculation and design. It's coming. Well, what's coming? A killing. His heart's pumping. He's going upstairs to free her from this world. He's thinking about what he'll do next. And this business of it depends on what she says is really of no consequence, is it? Because it's really part and parcel of his plan. The plan includes consideration of the means with which he's going to use to cause her death. He's contemplating homicide. How exactly it goes down depends maybe on what she says. But that's what's going to happen. Because he's a planner. And because he likes that flexibility. But it also kind of sounds like a cat, doesn't it? You ever seen a cat play with a mouse? Kills it in the end anyhow. That was the plan when the mouse was grabbed by the cat. Does the cat know what the mouse is going to do? Did Shawn Grate know what Elizabeth Griffith was going to do, how she'd react? No. But he knew she was going to die before they went up those stairs. After you find the defendant guilty of aggravated murder in count 1, you're going to consider whether he's guilty of the specification. Specification 1 to count 1 is part of a course of conduct involving a purposeful killing or attempt to kill 2 or more persons by the defendant. We have Elizabeth and Stacey. It's the same specification as to count 2. The defendant makes 2 women disappear. Course of conduct involves some factual link between the aggravated murder and the other purposeful killing that makes up the course of conduct. So what's the factual link? Location, murder weapon, cause of death, similar motivation. All of the circumstances get taken into account. Some connection, common scheme, plan, pattern, psychological thread that ties the offenses together. We have 2 women dead in 363 Covert Court, both of them victims of cervical compression. Both of them are either completely naked or partially naked. They are both thrown away, both kidnapped, both stolen from. There's your course of conduct. There is your factual link. Specification 2 to count 1 is that the aggravated murder was committed while the defendant was attempting to commit or fleeing immediately after committing the offense of kidnapping. And the defendant was the principal offender. And for whatever reason, it will not save my correction to principal. But an offense like kidnapping is not a momentary thing. You can have momentary crimes, can't you? Real quick, somebody grabs a candy bar in the store, pockets it, bam, done. Right? Kidnapping's not one of those offenses. Kidnapping takes time to plan out. It takes time to develop, even in the course of the kidnapping. And we'll get into what those are, what kidnapping actually is. But to restrain someone's liberty, you do it over a period of time. And once her liberty is restrained, she's never released. Now, count 2 is also the same specification, essentially. Count 2, aggravated murder, is that he committed it during the course of a kidnapping. So we'll get into all that. Wow. The death must occur as part of the acts leading up to or occurring during or immediately after, or fleeing immediately after the commission of the kidnapping, and directly associated with the commission or flight after the offense of kidnapping. It's an important definition. It's going to be an important definition for all the counts that you consider. In order to have a crime, in order to be culpable for a crime in Ohio, you have to have intent, and then you have to act. You got to have both. So once you form that intent, then the acts transpire over time. And that intent can be multifaceted. And we'll see that with Stacey, what the intent is. That intent can encompass all kinds of criminal conduct. But once the intent is in place, and those series of acts result in the kidnapping, then what occurs once the kidnapping is perfected and ongoing is when the aggravated murder occurs within that kidnapping, he's guilty here. So if you kidnap somebody, and while they're still kidnapped, you kill them, that's what this counts for. Count 2, aggravated murder, is just like the specification, isn't it? While committing, attempting to commit, or fleeing immediately after committing. 3 elements again: purposely, cause the death of another, while committing kidnapping. Now, what do we know about these particular elements? We know that he purposely caused the death of another. Meant to do it intentionally, not accidentally. So, where's the deliberation here? While committing kidnapping. Was she kidnapped, then killed? And specification 2 to count 2 is exactly the same. So what's kidnapping? As to Elizabeth Griffith, did remove her from a place where she could be found or restrained her liberty for the purpose of terrorizing or inflicting serious physical harm on her. Now this is a standalone count. So you deliberate on the standalone count, and he could be guilty of kidnapping. But then you have to determine, was she killed while she was being kidnapped? And that is where the aggravated murder and the specifications come in. So she could be kidnapped. It's possible that she's kidnapped, but not killed while she's kidnapped. Now, under these facts, that would be ridiculous. Because, of course, at what point was she free to leave? Now, the kidnapping elements are a little different. Force, threat, or deception. Remove another person from the place where she was found. Restrain her of her liberty. Now, once she's restrained, once she's removed, that kidnapping is ongoing. And then you need the purpose to terrorize or inflict serious physical harm. Force, that's fairly straightforward. Any violence, compulsion, or constraint, like choking someone, even if you say you're joking, putting your hands on them. She's not free to leave once that happens. Threat. We saw that with Stacey Hicks, didn't we? Don't get stupid again. That's what he told her in the video. Pressure sufficient to overcome the will of another, make her fearful. Or deception, which there's many ways to deceive, aren't there? But it's interesting that you're going to be instructed by the court that you could be deceived by withholding information. Like showing someone the upstairs of the house. They think they're going to look around. They think they're going to see what's up there. Take a tour, if you will. And the whole time you're walking along with them, you're going to see if she wants to die. Probably didn't tell her that, did he? He didn't want to tell detectives that. And if you told somebody that, you'd have a hard time getting them up the stairs, wouldn't you? Deception. This defendant at one point calls himself a deceiver. Even while he was talking to detectives, he wasn't sure if he was done deceiving. Removal from a place where found, to change her location. From downstairs to up, or even from her apartment to covert court. The defendant's conduct will help you determine. We know she's not at her apartment. We know she's not found downstairs. Or restrain her of her liberty, to limit her freedom of movement. and we'll hear in a bit, choking her, hugging her, all restraints. The restraint doesn't have to be for any specific duration or time. It can be short or it can be long. But once you put violence on somebody, once you choke them, even if you want to call it a joke, if they don't think it's a joke, they are limited in their movement, are they not? And they are kidnapped under these facts. To terrorize, to fill with terror, anxiety, and any physical harm that carries a substantial risk of death. Well, we know it carries a substantial risk of death. It did. Substantial suffering, prolonged or intractable pain, serious physical harm. Could be either. You don't need both. You don't need terrorize and serious physical harm. It could be or. So what are our facts relating to Elizabeth Griffith? She was killed August 17th, purposely, by Shawn Grate. She was found September 13th, discarded in a closet, naked and tied up, which is a fact we really can't ignore, can we? Dr. Todd Barr with the understatement of the day. When you find someone like this, it's not natural. No, doctor, it is not. And it's important because sometimes we get caught up in the legal terms. We get those blinders on. You start thinking, what does this mean? What does this word mean? You got attorneys defining the term while at you. But you can look at all the facts and circumstances and evidence to make your decision. She's tied up, dead and naked in a closet, folks. And we're going to argue over whether she was killed and kidnapped. After 3 to 5 minutes of cervical compression. In this room, with the restraints on the bed, this fold-out bed. There's the rocking chair he says she sat in. Heck, we even see the stuffed animals he said he showed her. That sexual device propped up against the wall. Is that ready to go? It's not there on accident. It was placed there. The restraints are placed there. All that stuff in front of the closet placed there. It all has meaning. And while we contemplate that, under the bed, this little bottle of hotel lotion. That's not there by accident either, folks. All the facts and circumstances and evidence. All placed there purposely. Discarded and thrown away. Buried under all that clothing. Bound. And the defendant, he don't want to give it up, does he?
So, when was the last time you had contact with her?
I had no contact with her.
Haven't had any contact with her. Well, we know that's not true. So there's a lie.
Shawn. You know where she's at? Where's she at?
She's set free. No more problems. She'll have to cry no more.
How'd you set her free?
She jumped on my back.
What happened?
Did you catch what he first says? She jumped on my back. That's the only time he says that in all those hours of audio. She jumped on my back. That's weird. Why would she jump on his back? Now later he'll say her shirt came off in a struggle, but he never describes a struggle. The only time he ever has a struggle is right there. She jumped on my back. Why would Elizabeth Griffith be jumping on his back? Cries to him. His long silence is absolutely meaningful. Calculating, thinking about what to say. What's my play here? When I think back about Elizabeth, I don't know what happened. Really? He don't want to tell. He don't want to tell what happened with Elizabeth Griffith.
We still got the issue with Elizabeth.
The issue is with Elizabeth.
You said you helped her find peace. You set her free.
That's what she said.
Yeah. How'd you help her?
I would quit my pain. Listen there. But confusion. Before you. Get away.
Get away where? She talked about going anywhere?
You know, some family in Florida.
Now the progression here is interesting because within that transcript at page 19, no contact with her. 50, set her free. She jumped on my back, which is most definitely contact. And then at page 71, later in the interview, maybe she went to Florida.
And where she was, I'm guilty.
If I know where she's at, then I'm guilty. Well, we would agree with that, wouldn't we?
Can we go to her? Why wouldn't you do that? Hey. If you have a conscience or you don't, and I think you do.
And back to I don't know. So he's waffling. Because he doesn't want to be found guilty. Because it's about him. It's about the impact on him. It's not about finding Elizabeth. It's not about figuring out what happened to Elizabeth. It's not about helping the detectives out. Can you help me find her? They ask both detectives, lay and major, can you help me out, Shawn? Where is she? We need to find her. She's got family. Where's she going to be? And his concern is, if I tell you, I'm guilty. And the defendant's story continues to evolve.
Call me later. It's like 11 o'clock at night. Maybe it's 10 o'clock. Right. And if you ask them, let's be honest, you talk some more. All right, that's fine. If you want that.
I'm going to sacrifice my life for hers. That's not a momentary thing. It's not a thought that just comes to. It's not a reaction. I'm going to sacrifice my life for hers. Shows you that there's premeditation in how he acts. There's deliberate thought. There's a purposeful scheme here to cause the death of Elizabeth Griffith. He also discusses marrying her. I'm not going to marry her. Nobody's going to marry her. That's odd. Is this defendant's term for marrying code for sex? Could be. Could be. It's also different from the showing the stuffed animal story, isn't it? But what it includes is that thought process.
Okay, Detective Baker, we have Detective Evans in the room, Shawn Grate in the room, is
See him smile? Look at that defendant smile in that video.
September 15, 2016, time 17:04. Shawn's going to demonstrate the way he uses in strangulation cases that we've been discussing.
Well, Elizabeth, right? It's kind of just joking. We were just joking, like how she wished she kind of would die. I mean, so I'm help you. I just feel like this, I shouldn't.
There's a kidnapping, ladies and gentlemen. There is using violence upon a person for the purpose of restraining their liberty. At that point, Elizabeth Griffith's kidnapped.
Or burning him up at the same time.
Right, and she kind of just like whacked my hands and I started flipping out and stuff like that to the point.
She's flipping out because she doesn't know it's a joke. Doesn't think it's a joke. The circumstances in front of Elizabeth Griffith is that this defendant just tried to kill her. Just restrained her of her liberty.
Well, I had to just like grab her and just lean forward, just press, you know what I mean?
Okay. All right, that explains that one,
Just
Elizabeth.
fall down. You know.
You just got to go down with her.
Yeah, I laid her down and finished. And even after she stopped breathing, I held on. So she messed her pants pretty much.
Okay,
You know what I mean? I didn't release.
okay.
I continued.
Okay, Shawn.
That is demonstrating an aggravated murder while kidnapping someone. She was never free to leave. She's upstairs, most isolated part of the house. Puts his hands around her neck. She begins freaking out, which tells you that she's filled with terror, anxiety, per the instruction. That he's putting a move on her that could result in death. And she begins flipping out for a period of time. So he grabs her, applies that compression, starves her brain of oxygen, and kills her.
No, you said it right. I mean, no, I wasn't too far into it where anyway I couldn't stop.
When you were strangling her, and she says, while you're strangling her, forgive him or for it, you know, that's not what he does.
It's about where she kept saying, Lord, save me. Right? I would stop. He already has. I mean,
Meaning hers.
yeah. He already has. She kept repeating it, so now you gotta believe it. We have the Bible. We do this every year, Bible them together.
At what point?
Saying Jesus. Jesus loves you.
Okay, meaning you had already strangled her but let go, and then she's kind of freaking out. So you trying to come up with comfort, meaning you're trying to hug her to make this go away so that you could let her go because she won't tell anybody?
I said, and then try to hug her,
What'd she do?
get off me, try to hug me, and she just kept going on. And she said, Jesus, save me. And I said, I heard her ask Jesus, we just talked about that.
And she said that she had asked him,
Yeah.
and you told her, did they already say it?
What is that? 3 times. Yeah.
Jesus, save me. Because she believes she's going to die. He strangled her. She told him, stop, you're hurting me. You just tried to hurt me. Get away from me. He's restrained her of her liberty. Has a conversation with her about Jesus and being saved. Is trying to give her a hug. He says she keeps resisting so that he could be able to let her go. Not to comfort her, but for himself, because he's planned on killing her, regardless of what happens. And in that clip says they sang a little Jesus Loves Me, a children's Sunday school song, which is in keeping with what the witnesses told us with her religious ideations and her childlike demeanor. And at the end there, that was an emotional one for him, because it's all about him all the time. He had his hands on her, he's flipping out, she's not free to leave, and he proceeds to kill her. That constitutes aggravated murder with premeditation. It constitutes kidnapping, and it constitutes killing her during the course of that kidnapping. The defendant is guilty. Count 1, count 3, count 2, both specifications to counts 1 and 2. Second victim, Stacey Stanley. Crimes for your consideration are going to be aggravated murder times 2. 2 different ways to violate the kidnapping statute, and aggravated robbery. There are also specifications to those aggravated murder counts and sexual motivation specifications to the kidnapping counts. I think we remember that moment when he tells about Stacey. And what's interesting here is his mindset between Stacey and Elizabeth, isn't it? Because we played those clips of, I didn't have any contact with her. Maybe she's in Florida, don't know what you're talking about, don't know her, set her free, but I didn't really mean that. And then what's with Stacey? Oh, there's another one down in the basement. Who's down in the basement? Down in the basement, it's a woman who liked to cook, liked her dogs, and a cat that perpetuated the same name of every cat she owned. And as Corey said, doing the best she had ever done. Until she got a flat tire at the BP station in Ashland. Evidence shows this is the woman not looking to party. She's looking to get landscaping supplies. She's looking to get her nails done. And even at the coroner's office, her nails are still just as they were done by Sonny. So what do we know? know she was kidnapped September 8th. We know she was dumped in the basement under piles of trash. We know she's naked from the waist down. We know she has the same cervical compression cause of death as Elizabeth Griffith. We know that she was forcibly orally raped just prior to death. And we know she was robbed of her car, cash, Ohio Directions card, and Huntington Bank card. Count 7, aggravated murder. Again, prior calculation and design. So the same theory as Elizabeth Griffith's count 1, aggravated murder, is count 7, aggravated murder, but as to Stacey. Same elements, purposely, prior calculation, design, caused the death of another. We know that he purposely caused the death of Stacey Hicks. Now, what do we know about prior calculation and design? If we recall our video, that starts off with, we were still getting along, right? We were still getting along. That video at 2 a.m. looked like they were getting along? Does it matter that they were getting along? Would it matter if she voluntarily entered the house? No. None of that matters.
When did that change?
Probably when she started talking about that guy about getting rid of her sometime. She was on the phone, I think, with her son. Like, why are you with another guy? You know what I mean? The guy's gonna help you. You know, like she's being dumped out by her son or someone, whoever she's talking to. I don't know who it was. But it was like on her case about, like, why is she talking to me when another, when the son is coming? It's like, I talked to one of my friends coming over to help you. You know what I mean? She dated her with him. They get together sometime. And that's when I brought her out later on.
So when
Started her on that.
so during that,
Just another sneaky woman, just trying to use her.
It started brewing then. Even out at the BP, he's starting to formulate this plan, this intent. Even as he's standing next to her and she's talking to Wayne Bright, which he finds flirty. Her son is pimping her out by calling a family friend to come help her. And I'm going to use her. That is a key phrase here, folks. I'm going to use her. It demonstrates his purpose. All of his purposes. You use all of the facts and circumstances and evidence. Indicates it by his conduct. His purpose is indicated by his conduct. I'm going to use her. Now there he expresses it to others. So what does this mean? To use her, he has to kidnap her. To use her, he's going to use her for his own sexual gratification. In the rape, he's going to steal from her. Car, money, cards. And all of the facts and circumstances indicate this. What's it mean to use her? He threw her away. Literally, he threw her away under the trash. Like you would anything else that you had used up. When you're done, it goes in the trash can. That's what he means when he says, just another sneaky woman, I'm going to use her. And when you think about using people, think about this. At the time he's got that video going, at the time he's going to use her and kill her, Elizabeth Griffith's shampoo is in his bathroom. That's what this defendant means by use. It's about him. Everything in this world is about him, for his purposes, for his use. And when he's done, just like anything else, a bottle of shampoo, a can of Mountain Dew, a cigarette butt, a human being, throws them away. Same specifications, we already discussed, 2 or more persons. There's no forgetting this quote. How'd she die? Tongue out of her mouth. How flippant. When you choke a woman out, they die with their tongues out of their mouth. There's a factual link between Elizabeth and Stacey, isn't it?
I think there were a couple in such a short period of time there.
And I thought that they were just, they just came to me.
I mean, you feel like this is what you needed to do?
Yeah, I felt like it was meant to be something crazy.
They came to him because it was meant to be. They came to him to die. That statement is instructive to his motivation, to how he operates, as it is creepy. Count 8, aggravated murder, is similar. It's similar to Elizabeth Griffith in that it was committed during the kidnapping. But this one is broader. Kidnapping and/or rape and/or aggravated robbery. His purpose to use her will include all of those. She has more to use than Elizabeth. And the opportunity is presented itself, and he's flexible enough to do that. Purposely caused the death of another, he did that while committing kidnapping and/or rape and/or aggravated robbery. The specification, 2 to count 7 reads exactly the same. And specification 2 to count 8, exactly the same. Aggravated murder committed while attempting to commit or committing kidnapping and/or rape and/or aggravated robbery. He is the principal offender. We know that. There's that definition of while. It hasn't changed. It's exactly the same. Death must occur as part of the acts leading up to or occurring during. Acts occurring during the commission of kidnapping and/or rape and/or aggravated robbery. You only need one. You don't need all of them. If he did it during one, if he killed her during the course of the acts with the rape, he's guilty. If he did it during the course of the acts, the aggravated robbery, he's guilty. And here's the easy one. The low-hanging fruit for you folks is the kidnapping. Because she was definitely kidnapped. She was definitely restrained of her liberty. We saw it. And then he killed her. Kidnapping, rape, aggravated robbery. Only takes one, folks. Now, this kidnapping, as to Stacey, is a little different from Elizabeth. This one is the same force, threat, or deception. Remove her or restrain her liberty, but for the purpose of engaging in sexual activity against her will. Well, we know he did that. There are your elements broken down. use her. He was going to use her. It was brewing at the BP. Sexual activity includes fellatio. Count 10, kidnapping. Purpose of terrorizing or inflicting serious physical harm on Stacey J. Hicks. That is the same count we discussed as to Elizabeth. Just now it says to Stacey. Causing her terror or anxiety. There are those elements again. And the specification, committed to kidnapping with a sexual motivation. Specification to count 10 is the same. Sexual motivation means the defendant committed the offense with purpose to gratify his sexual needs or desires. Use her, which is what he tells you he was doing.
Okay. Has there ever been a girl that you had kept that you didn't kill her, that you just kept her for a while?
No.
No?
Never adopted Lauren before.
Okay.
Lori's usage of new. That never done. Like Lori, other than that one, Stacey, a little bit.
How long did you keep Stacey before she...
Was about an hour.
Stacey, a little bit. This is a little kidnapping. It's ridiculous. We know he kidnapped her. We know he raped her. Now there's a still shot off that video. We know her other eye is damaged from some sort of violence being committed against her. That is what restraint of liberty looks like. That's a quintessential photo of that. Because she wanted to answer her cell phone, because she wanted to leave. She wanted to go home. And then he proceeds to rape her. You'll have that other video back there. Feel free to watch it if you feel you need more evidence. Rape, engaging in sexual conduct with another person when the offender purposely compels the other person to submit by force or threat of force. Now, the court is going to instruct you that the defendant has pled guilty to rape as to Stacey. Your determination, what you still have to find, is the while. The death has to occur as part of the acts leading up to or occurring during that rape. Could be the kidnapping, could be the aggravated robbery, could be all three, could be two. So the admission to the rape is not definitive. You have to determine whether the aggravated robbery or the aggravated murder was committed while part of those acts. The death has to occur as part of those acts leading up to or occurring during.
Did you have sex with her?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, first. I don't know. And then she wanted to play the innocent thing. I just snapped on her. Yeah, but all this one, she'd come home, 11 o'clock, don't even know me. I mean, kind of like, almost said, I'm gone. There could be something with that going on. Someone gave up on her.
She came home with him 11 o'clock at night. What did she expect? That's the defendant's attitude. And the further statement, that coming home with the defendant, since she's sent from God to him, going home with this defendant is the functional equivalent of God giving up on you. Wow. Let that sink in for a minute. That because Stacey Hicks gave him a ride and was in the house, God gave up on her. And this wasn't premeditated? This didn't occur while she was kidnapped? The defendant didn't have a purpose to kidnap, rape, and rob her?
I'll be honest with you. I mentioned that she had sugar daddies. My brother went away. I brought that up. And she just straight up lied to me. Just like playing on, she's all innocent. I just seen how she just played this dude about changing her tire. And you know, he's in time and all this, you know what I mean? Because she was waiting on this guy to come and change tire. Which I wanted to change the tire with his tool still. While she's out and telling him, I mean, so, whatever, you know what I mean? It's not used to that type of life.
So did you feel like she'd already sealed her fate when you watched her be manipulated to that man?
You know? When she lied to me.
About when you called her sugar, when you called her out on it?
Yeah.
That'd be Wayne Bright, the sugar daddy. But it's brewing at BP. He's thinking about it at BP, then he takes her home. She won't admit to his way of thinking. Can't blame her for that. Who would? Wouldn't admit that there's sugar daddies. So her fate is sealed. Sealing her fate is one of the final steps in a definite process this defendant is going through. It is his mental state, his premeditated way of thinking as he's contemplating killing this woman. Now, aggravated robbery. Defendant, while attempting to commit or fleeing immediately after committing theft, grand theft, and or unauthorized use of a vehicle, inflicted serious physical harm on Stacey Hicks. Now, this is a standalone count. We know that the defendant inflicted serious physical harm on Stacey Hicks. We know that he stole her property, took her car, kept the car. So we know he's guilty of aggravated robbery. The question is, why? Did the death occur as part of the acts? Are these intertwined with this aggravated robbery? And again, you find the kidnapping or the rape, you're done, he's guilty. But he kills her to take her property. He kills her to use her. His intent in this regard is very broad, because use her demonstrates that purpose, that intent to do all of it to her, to use her up. And in fact, that's what he did. He's demonstrated that by his conduct, as you'll be instructed. Serious physical harm, that definition hasn't changed. Substantial risk of death, or even substantial suffering, prolonged or intractable pain. He's beat on her. We know that eye was bright red. The underlying theft offense, it can be theft, which is for just regular property. Grand theft is theft of a motor vehicle, or unauthorized use of a vehicle. Could be any one of those. Don't need all three. Any one of them, he's got an underlying theft offense. For theft and grand theft, purpose to deprive the owner of property or services. The property is a motor vehicle, then we call it grand theft. Knowingly obtain or exert control over the property or services without the consent of the owner. We know we've got that. There's the definition of property. Not particularly complicated there. Could be unauthorized use of a vehicle. What do we know? September 9th, he killed her. He separates the keys, house key from the Mitsubishi keys from the can of mace. Joanna Smith sees him with it on the night of the 10th, and it was towed in the evening of the 11th. The keys are still at Covert Court on 9/13 when the police arrive. BCI processes the house. He's kept possession and control over that vehicle for that period of time. Knowingly use or operate motor vehicle without consent, possession for 48 hours or more. We know what a motor vehicle is. The property he's taking, the car, the directions card, $43 of currency, Huntington Bank card, all without her consent. There's her vehicle with the license plate number as described.
It's a nice car that you borrowed that you've been driving around. You told her that you had a car up down the street.
Why, zero? I found car keys. Showed her up.
What, you found some car keys?
Yeah, I found car keys. Found a car key.
Where did you find it?
Down last week.
Why lie about the car? Because he stole it. That's why. Directions card. We find the directions card under the bed. It's separated from her, separated out from her purse. He's deprived her of it. Steals her money.
Did you have money in her purse?
Stole her $43. And then remember Brandon, the middleman, he talks to Detective Major about. Made some calls once he came into some money. Then Exhibit 381, the phone extraction report from that cell phone that he uses to make calls with. On 9/9 at 12:35 p.m. Makes a call to Brandon. Why is he calling Brandon? Because he's got Stacey's $43. And now that he's flush with cash, it's time to call Brandon. Then there's Exhibit 165. In here, got his ID. Social Security card. This is obviously functioning as his wallet. Even got a birth certificate for him. What did he put in here? Oh yeah. Stacey Hicks bank card. Slipped it into his wallet. So, defendant's guilty of purposeful killing of Stacey. We watched him, at least in part, kidnap her. You have the opportunity, if you want, to watch him rape her. And we know she was a victim of aggravated robbery. Count 7 requires prior calculation and design. Count 8 requires killing during the kidnapping and or rape and or aggravated robbery, any one of them. Specifications are the same, multiple killings while committing those offenses, any one of them. We heard her fate was sealed.
When did that change?
Probably when she started talking about that guy, about getting together sometime. She was on the phone, I think, with her son. Like, what was another guy? You know, I mean, a guy's coming to help you. You know, like she's being dumped out by her son. There's someone there she saw in 10 pounds of love. But it was like on her case about, like, why is she talking to me? One or another, and that's when someone's coming. It's like, I talked to one of my friends is coming over to help you. And, you know what I mean? And she initiated it with him to get together sometime. And that's when I called her out later on.
So when
Started
you,
growing that.
so explain that.
Just another sneaky woman, just want to use her.
Okay.
And they learned. And you know, that she told herself about getting, I call it retard check, but assistance check each month.
So when you asked her to come in,
I wasn't too sure what I was going to do.
but you knew it might happen.
Yeah, it might.
And you were be honest.
I wasn't too sure. As far as like, was premeditated with her in a way before I even got into the house. It was brutal. It just depends on how things went.
Do you feel in that situation that,
I'll get worse and worse.
okay, and inevitably, when she comes in, she's going to say something wrong. But the chances of her ever leaving are pretty slim. Am I right? When she comes in, she's going to mess up.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
She's going to say something mess up. The defendant himself says it's premeditated. So there you go, folks. You can always just go with that. Defendant's story as to Stacey evolves, doesn't he? Remember the video version? He just says, hey, grabbed her and choked her up. Yet she's found with a ligature around her neck.
So you wanted to tell me about the journal?
Yeah, because the dates are important, I believe.
Yes, I think they are.
There's something else. Now, Stacey, right, like she maced me. I pressed. I had my eyes closed as I was strangling her. And that's what, you know what I mean? I know I got something, a cloth or something, and I just twisted it on her neck. I didn't completely strangle her. I was getting all sweaty. It was just, she had mace on her. I mean, I remember I got the cloth. I don't know what it was, but I just kept twisting it.
Okay.
And that's, maybe you can explain some of the marks, her neck.
Okay.
That's not what he described in the video, was it? Didn't talk anything about twisting anything around.
Stacey, I mean, pretty much, I was waiting to be stabbed by something. Anything. She had her hands free, my eyes were closed. And I was just waiting. You know what I mean? Wow. And she breathed, she turned. You know what I mean?
thought she was going to get me with something. I thought she was smarter than that. Again, it's her fault, not his. And it's brewing at the BP. So regardless of what happens in there, he's got this plan to use her. But he also can't just come out and say, here's what happened. That's not what he does. Each time he opens his mouth to discuss it, it changes a little bit. In fact, there's 3 different Mace stories.
No. Did she die during that? Or did she die, well, you already told me how she died with strangulation. How far after
She
that?
was fine and dandy until I started videoing and she acted okay and everything. She was awkward and worse. Until I started videoing and then when she started acting up on the video.
How far after the video was made did you strangle her?
I gave her leeway, right? That's fair Mace right there.
Say again?
I was on the other side of the room.
Yeah,
Her Mace was right there.
okay.
She grabbed the Mace, sprayed me. I just grabbed her, choked her out.
And that was how long after
15 minutes.
after that oral sex?
You say there, everything was fine and dandy till I started videoing her. We know it wasn't because of her eye. It wasn't fine and dandy. Just grabbed her and choked her out. But again, I'm on the other side of the room. I left her mace there. There's that cat and mouse game again, isn't it? See what she'll do. Will she make a play for the mace? If you even want to believe she ever maced him at all. We'd like to think so.
Stacey, a lot of them were sitting side by side the entire whole time. And hear her, when I'd stand up, go across the room, she'd just still stay there. You know what I mean? Just, she didn't feel threatened or nothing. We were getting along still.
Okay.
So somewhere along the line, she felt threatened. And I was still thinking about this. What went wrong exactly with Stacey? Because I didn't have those thoughts. But I do remember when she grabbed her mace and she missed me the first time. And then I turned around. I was on the bed. She did was a backhand and kind of got me.
Spray again?
Yeah, she just sprayed me again. A shot, you know, man, it was just, dang, I just lost it. And then I just turned her around, right? Did pretty much the same thing. I just clenched on, did not let go.
Now that's different from the first version. First version, she shoots him with maces on the other side of the room. Now, this is that video version. Misses him, and then he demonstrates the backhanded shot of mace. That's different. The truth shouldn't change, folks. The truth shouldn't change. Saying she didn't feel threatened, though, we know she was. We know what was happening.
Yeah, I just got twisted it on her. That's how I can hear. She's trying to apologize for macing me. I don't know. I'm trying to understand why she maced me. She's angry at the situation. She wanted to get her last intimate in because she thought she had the clearance from the door.
She was saying she could have left, but decided she needed to do one last thing with the
She makes, she's, once she went off, and then I grabbed her from her. It was just a little bit of, I could see a little, she got me. Yeah, she got her last word in, and then once she realized, that didn't work out. She saying she didn't mean to. It's like her nerves, like it just happened. You know what I mean? It's like, well, maybe it was just meant to be, I guess. I don't know.
So there's version 3. Now, apparently, she's free to go. Ready to go. Has her keys, told her she could leave. She's supposed to walk out the door. And instead of running out the door, she decides to mace him. Common sense, folks. Common sense tells you that's not true. What those 3 versions of the mace, though, tell you is that the mace interrupted the fun. He was still kidnapping her. He was still raping her. He had already formulated that intent to steal her stuff after he's done using her. So the intent plus the acts leading through. But the mace interrupted the fun. How much longer would she have been there before he killed her had she not maced him? That's the question. It doesn't really matter. He's committed all the offenses. And here's the problem with this whole idea that she was free to go. And I suspect you're going to hear in a moment significant amount of, well, she's free to go. She could have left. We were done. The raping was done. The kidnapping was done. She could just walk out. Stacey Hicks was free to go. If all of those acts had already happened, she had her keys, told she could leave. Rape was done. Kidnapping's done. We're going to ignore his statements about it's brewing at BP and her fate was sealed when she denied the sugar daddies. Let's ignore that. Let's give the defendant all the benefit of the doubt. All of that happened. Why is she found dead, naked from the waist down in the basement? With her skirt up around her waist. Why would she be found that way if it's all done? It's all over. She can leave. Here are your keys. Leave. With her skirt up around her waist and no pants on. Really? Use your common sense, folks. All of the facts and circumstances and evidence, the way she's found in the basement, demonstrates all you need to know. It demonstrates his purpose. It tells you what he was doing when he killed her. It tells you all you need to know. She's found that way because he has prior calculation and design. Because he had formulated the intent to rape, rob, and keep her. It's because he used her. And when he was done, there's no sense in dressing her. He tells you he wrapped her in a blanket and drug her down the steps with her head hitting the steps as they went down. And then he rolled her out onto the floor and threw the rest of the trash on top of her. Because he was done using her. This defendant is guilty of count 7, aggravated murder, killing Stacey with prior calculation and design. He's guilty of both specifications there too. He's guilty of aggravated murder, killing her while she was still kidnapped, killing her as part of this course of conduct, rape and robbery. Guilty of count 9, the sexual motivation spec. That was his key purpose. to commit that rape. Count 10, he kept her, inflicted terror on her, inflicted serious physical harm on her. Count 12, aggravated robbery, he took her stuff after killing her. Defendant is guilty of every remaining count in the indictment, beyond a reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen. You've been more than patient. You've been more than attentive. And I thank you for that consideration. And I'll thank you in advance for your common sense. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.